Hello, my name is Mark, and this will be the first in our series of Why I Believe presentations. And the first one is Why I Believe There's a God. Now, in the Bible, the existence of God is assumed from the first verse on, Genesis chapter 1, and in verse 1. And the argument is made, particularly in Scripture, that we know there's a God simply from looking at the evidence that surrounds us. That's the point of Psalm 19, verses 1 through 4. In Romans chapter 1 and verse 20, and there in Romans 1:20, Paul makes the argument that the evidence for God in the physical universe, what surrounds us, is so overwhelming that everyone is without excuse not to search for God and find him and also obey him in the process. Years ago, though, when I was smaller, younger, as a child, I thought that faith in God was simply something that almost fell from the sky. It just happened. Some people believed, some people didn't believe. And in order to believe in God, you just had to wait for some sort of feeling to show up. And I found years later that that was completely inaccurate. Romans chapter 10, verse 17 says, faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. And Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 1 tells us that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things that's not seen. That faith is not a cross your fingers sort of thing, that faith is not a feeling. We're warned against following our feelings in Proverbs chapter 16 and in verse 25, and many other passages, that feelings can be great liars and undependable. Rather, faith is the result of examining the evidence and being convicted. It's almost like you're on a jury and the evidence is being presented. You weren't there at the very beginning, and you've never seen God. You've never heard a word from him. And so the evidence is being presented, and on the jury, you examine the evidence. You examine the case. This is what the apostles did when they preached, like in Acts chapter 17 and in verses 2 through 3. When Paul would come into a town, and he would lay out the evidence for that Jesus was the Messiah. He would go back to the Old Testament scriptures, and he would cite the prophecies. And he would take one verse after another, and he would simply build the case from the evidence that Jesus was the Messiah. And the way it's worded in Acts chapter 17 is in verse 2, according to Paul's custom, he went to them and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the scriptures, explaining and giving evidence that Christ had to suffer and rise again from the dead. And so he would point out the passages that would have said that, like clearly Psalm 22, Isaiah 53. And so faith is the result of being convicted by the evidence. And juries do that all the time. You're not there, you never saw the crime, you were not at the scene, but as the evidence is laid out from maybe fingerprints, DNA evidence, etc., the evidence becomes overwhelming. And even though you weren't there at the time, you know that's the person who did it, or they did not do it based on the evidence. There are things all the time that we operate upon like that. Like, how do you know your doctor's really a doctor? How do you know your dentist is really a dentist and not just someone posing as one? It's all based on the evidence. There are things every day that we put a lot of faith into that we really cannot prove 100% beyond a shadow of a doubt, particularly like, is your mom and dad really your mom and dad? You weren't there at the birth. At least in my case, there is only one person today that I know that is alive that can really vouch for the fact that my mom and dad are really my mom and dad, or at least give some more evidence on that, and that would be my older brother. But all the doctors are gone, all the nurses are gone. I have a birth certificate, but how do I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that that's true? Well, in a certain sense, you can't. There is an element of faith there, but it's not blind. It's not across your fingers. It is based on, well, I got this piece of evidence, that piece of evidence, that piece of evidence. And so that's enough evidence. And so I believe that mom and dad are really my mom and dad, or my doctor is really my doctor, or that there is a God. So here would be my first piece of evidence in this particular presentation. And this is really no particular order of importance. First of all, I would cite the evidence for the complexity of the human body. Psalm 139, verse 14, David said, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Now, evolution says that everything is a result of mindless, random chance. Yet the human eye and the human brain are far more advanced than our most sophisticated computers and cameras, which are the products of years of research, intelligence, design, and engineering. For example, like with the human eye, it can distinguish between 7 million colors, has automatic focusing, and handles 1.5 million messages simultaneously. That's pretty impressive. Now, you might say, well, eventually, man, with all this technology, is to come up with a computer and a camera that is far more sophisticated than the human brain or the human eye. If that happens, if that is even possible, then all you will do is prove the argument I am presenting. If that happens, then it will only happen because of years of research, design, intelligence, and complexity, and it will not be the product of random chance or accident. And there's a lot of other things like that in the human body. The heart, the circulatory system, the lungs, etc. All sorts of amazing things that clearly we cannot duplicate with our modern technology and engineering skills. And so I doubt if those things are just a product of time and chance. The universe, that would be my second argument. That is, who caused it? First of all, it's clear that the universe is not eternal. I mean, I think that's been proven scientifically. The very fact that people assign a date or an age to the universe tells us that it has not been around here forever, which means it had to have a beginning, had to have a cause. It just didn't pop into existence. So that's the first question I would have, is that clearly the universe is not eternal, matter is not eternal, so matter has not always been here. Well, what has always been? It's not matter, it must be mind, or it must be God. It's a self-evident truth that nothing comes from nothing. Nothing cannot produce something. We never see that happening in the world, that's not a product of our observation. And also it's very clear that life does not come from non-life. And so the Bible is correct in how it presents the origin of the universe. There had to be something before matter was created. And there had to be life, pre-existing life, before there could be life on this planet. Life can only come from life, and something can only come from something or someone. Basically, years ago, I kind of concluded that when it comes to the origin of all things, we are faced with two choices, basically two miracles. Either we believe the miracle of Genesis, Genesis 1:1, that an all-powerful and all-wise God brought everything into existence with just speaking it into existence. Genesis 1:1. That's okay. Now, the only alternative would be another miracle. That is, that everything came into existence without any sort of cause. It just popped into existence. And that's what evolution is trying to get us to believe. And that would be a miracle, because a miracle is what is contrary to the laws of science. And everything just popping into existence, something coming from nothing, and life coming from non-life, would be a miracle. And so your choice at the end of the day is, do you either believe in the miracle of Genesis, that an all-powerful God brought everything into existence, or do you believe the other miracle, that is all-powerful nothingness brought everything into existence? Which is more reasonable? Which one does the evidence support? And that's, again, what we're looking at. Evidence. What does the evidence say? My third argument would be the universe is not just a random sort of collection of things going all sorts of directions, kind of like a class of kindergartners, everything running like a chicken with its head cut off. The universe operates upon definite, specific, precise laws govern it. And those things remain the same, day in and day out. Gravity remains constant. Mathematical equations remain constant. The fact that a hot cup of coffee left on a counter will cool down, that remains constant. The universe will rotate in 24 hours. The speed of light remains the same. All of those things are constants. In other words, how do we explain the existence of so many unchanging laws of nature if what caused it was random chance and just an accident? Does an accident produce things that are from there on predictable and definite, like definite laws that govern the universe in which we live? Why is the universe so orderly? why is the universe so reliable? Why is the universe based on mathematics? And mathematics are consistent and reliable. Why is it that case? And so I think the only conclusion I can come to is behind the universe is a great mathematician and a great engineer and a God who is consistent and unchanging. As in the book of Hebrews chapter 13, verse 7, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. There's a great engineer who planned the universe and built into the universe precise laws that keep it going, that govern it. In Colossians 1, 16 and 17, Paul makes that point, is that God or Jesus is the creator of all things visible and invisible. And the invisible things would be the laws, included in that would be the laws that govern our galaxy. Well, how about this? The foundation of scientific discovery. As scientists do their research, they're operating upon two basic assumptions. Okay, first is the laws of the universe do not change. The law of gravity is not going to be different tomorrow. That they operate on that assumption is that those laws that they have discovered are going to be the same laws today, tomorrow, the next day. All right. Also, there's another assumption that they operate upon. The laws and principles that govern the universe are both logical and can be discovered and can be understood by the human brain. And so that only makes sense in a universe that God has created. If an all-wise God created the universe, then it makes sense that the laws that govern the universe would be precise, orderly, understandable by the creature that God made. That would make sense. In fact, Genesis 1:28 basically argues for that. It says, have dominion and rule, which would indicate that as human beings, as men and women made in God's image, that we can understand a good deal about the universe in which our Creator has placed us, that we can understand laws that govern this universe, and that we can use those laws to make our lives more comfortable, that we can come up with technology, things like that. We can come up with electricity and indoor plumbing and all sorts of things that make our lives comfortable. That's part of that command to have dominion over creation. Now, none of that makes any sense, though, if we're just an accident, if we just popped into existence. Why should things be consistent? Why should things be orderly? Why would we think that we could even understand it? And why would we think that our brain, which is the product of time and chance, even functions correctly? How do I know I am even making sense right now? As a Christian, I know I'm making sense because of my worldview. An all-wise God who made me in his image with a mind that can work, okay, and with a universe that I am meant to understand. But if we're just all the product of time and chance and randomness, and we're one big accident, then it could be that our brain's a big accident too, and that none of us are even making sense. So that would be my next argument. How about this? Number 5, the existence of DNA is another argument, another evidence for the existence of a designer, a creator. In every cell of your body, there is an incredibly precise and detailed instruction code, much like a computer program. And computer programs are made up of ones and zeros, and in a similar way, the DNA code in each of our cells is made up of 4 chemicals that scientists have abbreviated as A, T, G, and C. And just as an engineer designs a computer program, our DNA instructions in our cells are a 3 billion lettered program that tells the cell what to do, gives its instructions. And these are more than just chemicals, these are chemicals that instruct. And you never find precise information like this in reality without there being someone who wrote the information. Are we going to believe that complex computer programs just originated by accident? Because DNA is an incredibly complex program that is a chemical program. All right, number 6, the precision of the universe in which we live. In the book of Proverbs chapter 8, 27 through 31, Solomon notes that when God created the universe, wisdom was there with him. He was using wisdom to put it together. that the universe and the earth within it are planned. They weren't just thrown together in haste. In fact, in the book of Isaiah, there's a statement in Isaiah 45, verse 18, that when God created the earth, he created it to be inhabited. He did not create it a waste place. We look out through the galaxy at the planets that we can see, and what are they? They are waste places. Not a good place. I mean, a lot of people talk about going to Mars, and that sounds good, but you have to take your air with you. There's some problems there. You have to take your air with you, and your water with you, and your food with you, etc., because that doesn't exist there. So, but the earth was created to be inhabited, and God makes that very clear. This is not just an accident that life happens to be here. There are countless, and people call them exacting conditions, or people point out that on this planet we live on a razor's edge, that so many things in our galaxy, so many things associated with what surrounds us and with the planet itself, have to just be exact. If you would think like a number of dials that you would have to dial in, and all the numbers would have to be exactly spot on in order for life to happen here. That's what we have when it comes to the Earth. For example, the rotation of the Earth on its axis for existence is 1,000 miles per hour at the equator. If it were 100 instead, the days and nights would be 10 times as long, and the result would be that all our vegetation would burn up during the long day and freeze during the long night. The sun, the source of light, has surface temperatures of 12,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The Earth is just the right distance from the sun. A little bit closer, we would burn up. A little bit further away, and we would freeze to death. Again, not too far, not too close. If the sun gave less radiation, the result would freeze us all. If more, it would roast us all. The slant of the Earth is at an angle of 23 degrees, and there is a purpose for that. It gives us our seasons. The moon is at the exact right distance away from the Earth. The moon has a good effect upon the Earth, and it creates our tides, which flushes out our oceans and things like that. If it was further away, we would have no tides, and the oceans would become stagnant. If it was closer, it would pull the tides all across the American continent twice a day, and that would kind of not be handy for life in this world. And there are just many things like that. There are a number of constants that have to be the number they are, like gravity and things like that, speed of light, for life even to exist on this planet. We are not an accident. And so the razor's edge for life to exist on the Earth, another evidence that we live in a planned universe, not an accidental universe. Not only that, but we see precision, my seventh piece of evidence, everywhere, even in the smallest cell. Scientists have found within the cell there are thousands of what may be called biochemical machines in each individual cell of your body. All of their parts have to be in place simultaneously. We talk about all or nothing systems, and there's a number of them, or the cell can't function. Things which were thought to be simple mechanisms, such as being able to sense light and turn it into electrical impulses, are in fact highly complicated, even at the micro level of existence. So, and again, just all or nothing systems. You can't survive without half a heart. Again, how did the human heart evolve? There are also ecosystems where the flower needs the bee, and the bee needs the flower, and etc. for pollination. None of those things could have evolved where like, well, we got half of it working. Trouble is that you need all of it working in order for anything to survive. There's just too many all or nothing systems on the Earth, that a quarter working, a third working, a half working, 3/4 of it working, you don't survive. And so again, how does that happen? There are just too many things that cannot slowly evolve and the organism still be alive. Again, you can't survive with a third of a heart, or a third of a brain, or whatever, a third of your circulatory system working, that sort of thing. It has to be all working, or the thing dies. Okay. Also, number 8. So take God out of the picture. Let's say there is no God. We got a number of problems there, serious problems. First of all, the founding documents of this country, our Constitution, would be completely erroneous if there is no God. Our country would be based on an incredibly false premise. Because our founding documents speak of a creator and inalienable rights, and all men being created equal. There are great causes in the past that people fought for liberty, like the Revolutionary War, or the Civil War, or the fight against oppression in the Second World War, were not great causes after all, if there is no God, if there are no God-given virtues. Because if there is no God, there's no right and wrong. And if there is no creator, then there's no value in selflessness and sacrifice, valor or goodness, virtue or purity. All the movements in the past of human history that have been based on rights, such as the civil rights movements of the 1960s, or the right for women to vote, are likewise meaningless and a complete waste of time if there is no God, no creator. Because rights do not exist if we're the product of evolution. Rights do not exist if we're just an accident, if we're just an evolved animal. The God-given virtues, such as fairness and kindness and justice, are all meaningless if there is no God. All causes or movements against oppression are equally illogical, including movements against child abuse, wife abuse, sex trafficking, etc. Because without God, in a universe without God, there are no rights. There's nothing noble about throwing yourself on a hand grenade and saving your fellow soldiers. And there are no vices. There's nothing wrong with sex trafficking people if there is no God. If God does not exist, then most of the laws in this country are based on an incorrect foundation that people have special value. If there is no God, people do not have special value. People's lives are very cheap and meaningless. It's just survival of the fittest. Most of what has been written about such attributes as love and sacrifice and patience is also pointless. They are just empty words. Much of what has been written extolling marriage and the love in marriage and family, motherhood and fatherhood, also equally pointless. If God does not exist, then both conservatives and liberals, they're equally wrong. People who are against the death penalty often mention the danger of an innocent person being executed. Well, if there's no God, who cares if an innocent person is executed? In fact, if there is no God, there is no such thing as innocence or guilt, just to begin with. Again, no God, no right and wrong, no morals, no good, no evil, nothing praiseworthy, but nothing to blame either. It's just all meaningless. And there are some people at least have been honest enough, atheists that have been honest enough to admit that if there is no God, then everything is just meaningless and nothing really matters. Also, all environmental movements are equally meaningless if there is not a God. It only makes sense to take care of this creation if we are stewards of something that belongs to someone else. Psalm 24, verse 1. The earth belongs to the Lord and everything in it. The argument that we need to leave a better world for our children or grandchildren only makes sense if they have value beyond being related to us. Again, if there is no God, does it make sense to take care of the environment? Why should we? And why should we care about the people that come after us if there is no God? But if there is a God, then it makes sense to take good care of a creation in which the Creator has made us stewards. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 28. Not only that, but many of the tragedies that have existed in human history, for example, such as the Holocaust, no big deal then if there's no God. Again, if there's no God, there's nothing wrong with genocide. Might makes right. Those things are only wrong if we live in a universe in which there's a creator and there's an ultimate answering and accountability, and where men and women have souls. Because if you have a soul, then it makes sense that you are innocent until proven guilty if you have a soul. If you're just a product of evolution, that doesn't make sense at all. Who cares about innocence? Who cares about guilt? It just might makes right. So why do both conservatives and liberals and people of every race and political party use the same language and concepts? We all use God talk. Even atheists use God talk. And what I mean by that is everyone uses the same terminology that indicates that we are accountable. We speak of the words responsible, responsibility. We use the words should and ought. We use the words right, wrong, fairness, and justice. Those words only have meaning if one day we must answer to someone higher than ourselves. One day there must be a judgment and accounting. As is noted in the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 12, 13 and 14, or 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 10 through 11, we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ to give a recompense for the deeds done in the body, whether good or bad. Our language of right, wrong, responsible, responsibility, obligation, commitment, all those words, we are acknowledging by those words we live in a universe in which there is a creator to which we are responsible. Well, that was this particular episode of Why I Believe in God. And the next episode we will look at is why I believe that the Bible is God's communication to mankind. Until next time, this is Mark Dunnigan. I preach presently at the Church of Christ in Beaverton, Oregon, at 11775 Southwest 5th Street. The website there is beavertonchurchofchrist.net. You can see this and many other sermons there as well. Until next time, I'll see you in the funny papers.